Good evening, everyone. Hello. It's good to see you. My name is Mark Dolfini, and this is going to be about many people's favorite topic, money. So, if you're a business owner, you're going to want to stick around. If you're not a business owner, you're probably going to want to stick around because holding cash is probably one of the things that most people don't do well enough. And I hear this, if you have been in, well, let me slow down a second. I get all excited about this because when I see people get into this debt accumulation cycle, then they get a little bit of cash and then they pay down the debt, right? And then they maybe start to stack a little bit of cash and they get back into debt and they think, well, if I use my cash to pay off my debt, that'll put me at a net even. And I have been in that accumulating cash, pay off debt, get back to even, get back into debt, back to zero, accumulate cash. I have been through that cycle so many times. I can't even tell you how many times in my life that's happened. And it really didn't change until I started to just accumulate cash. And even though my debt, may oscillate, I have always looked at my cash and my debt as two separate things. I've never, once I kind of disassociated my cash and my debt, that really started to change things for me because I was just forever in that payoff debt cycle wherein I would just, my cash and my debt would always just oscillate back and forth and nothing ever really changed. So that's what changed for me. And that really started to change things. So what we're talking about today is about holding cash, and really it's more about just this topic around money. So for those of you who have been down this path before with me, this is all related to what I talk about in the Time Wealthy Advantage. And I'll talk about how you can get a copy of the Time Wealthy Advantage, including a strategy session with me, if you are interested. And this is for the folks in the United States. If you're outside the United States and you'd still like that option, I can get you a 45-minute session, but I can't give you a signed copy of the book. You'd have to get it through Amazon because I just can't do fulfillment outside of the United States for the price that I'm offering. Sorry about that. It's just, there's just too many countries. I tried to figure out what one price would make sense, and it just didn't make sense. So I apologize for that. But it blames shipping more than anything else. So Amazon can fulfill it a lot better than I can. So let's get into the Viper method. The Viper method is an acronym for those of you who have watched me for quite a while now, or if you have read the Time Wealthy Advantage, the Viper method is an acronym for vision, infrastructure, process, execution, and reporting. Now, tonight I'm not going to get into the nuances of the Viper method, but for those of you who have watched me before, you know that the four core functions of business is what is served by the Viper method. So it's vision, infrastructure, process, execution, and reporting, which serve the four core functions of business, which is lead generation, sales, operations, and accounting. So tonight, specifically out of these four core functions, we're really going to be looking and dialing into the accounting function. Now, I know we're not going to like, oh my gosh, accounting, I hate accounting. Look, before you get all catatonic, if you like money, it's just, accounting is just how you count the money. And accounting is not so much about numbers as it is about rules. So don't get all freaked out if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not a numbers person. If you understand rules, if you understand the rules of solitaire, if you understand the rules of of anything along those lines, if you understand rules, you understand accounting. That's really pretty much all you have to know. But tonight I want to talk to you about holding cash. And it's interesting because I get into this conversation and this topic of conversation with many people who are business owners, many people who are entrepreneurs, and they don't have a great relationship with money. They don't have a great relationship with cash. And they think that if they grow their business, that they're somehow going to have a better relationship with money. Like, you don't understand, I'm struggling. It's interesting, over the course of time, when I was making, I might have been making $3,000 a month and I was struggling. And then I would make $5,000 a month and I was struggling. And I would make $8,000, $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 a month, still struggling. And I was like, what in the world? I'm literally making 5x to my income from $3,000 a month to $15,000 a month and well beyond that. and I'm still struggling. What in the world is going on? Well, what was the common thread in that? Obviously, I'm the common thread. So looking at my money mindset was one thing that you had to look at, or that I had to look at, right? You didn't have to look at anything, but I had to look at that in myself. And this is the sort of thing that I see common all the time in business owners and entrepreneurs. They think that, well, once I make 20 grand a month, I'll be doing just fine, or 50 grand a month, or 100 grand a month. And it's interesting because there's people who come to me who want my help, who are bringing in literally hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, and they're struggling. And you might thinking, man, I'd love to have that sort of problem. And it's kind of funny because when you look at their lifestyle, you don't think like, wow, they're they're bringing in, 6 and 7 figures a year easily. And one that I'm looking at is I haven't formally signed anything yet, but they're literally an 8-figure business earner. And one of the reasons they want me to come is because of my background in accounting and my background in money management. And I didn't always get this right. And one of the things that I really had to figure out, and this is probably one of the smartest things that you can do as an entrepreneur, is you really have to silo off what's working from what's not working. Like, you don't want to fund your losers with your winners, because the minute you start funding your losers with your winners, then everything can get dragged down. So it's been pretty rare that all of my businesses have fired on all 8 cylinders at all 8 times. That would be like the first sign of the apocalypse. So if you've got multiple businesses, you know what I'm talking about. But on the rare occasion that the ratio of unicorns to leprechauns happens to be equal in that particular moment, and all of the businesses are making money, it's pretty rare, but it doesn't usually last, just because of the type and nature of businesses that I'm in. And that's pretty rare for lots of different entrepreneurs from what I hear. But when I see them making money, and the best thing that they can do is just to silo off that money, where if they've got let's say that they've got a roofing business, and they've got a plumbing business, and they've got an HVAC business, the best thing they can do is make sure that each one of those businesses has to stand on their own. Like, not like you're like, well, that business has to exist because it funnels jobs over here, and that business over there, that one funnels business over here. No, what you want to do is every business has to stand on its own. Every business should have, you'll have a set of what's called consolidated financial statements. Consolidated financial statements means that it might be one holding company, but each business has to stand on its own. And that's pretty true. So when you're looking, and that's really healthy, that's a much healthier approach to business than thinking that you're gonna, well, that business, even though it doesn't make any money, that business doesn't make money, and that business doesn't make money, but it all feeds over here, right? And that's everything over there. But at the end of the day, I don't care. Like, every business has to stand on its own. And the fact of the matter is, like, okay, if this business truly does feed this, then this business over here has to at least break even. Because if it's not breaking even, I'm sorry, like, nothing over here, right? Nothing on this side. Let me take my graphic down so I can make my point. This company over here should not be funding losers over here, and over here. All right. Unless it's truly a lead generation function, then in that case, it's not a separate business, right? It should stand on its own. So these are the sorts of things that I talk about all the time when people have bad money management in their businesses, and they think, well, shoot, how do I do this? How do I start to carve this out? And it's not easy. I will fully admit it took a while to extract, for example, I have a property management business, and I had my own rentals, which got, favorable treatment under my management company. And that was hard because those properties, I bought them wrong. I paid way too much for them. They needed a bunch of work, and I wasn't doing it right. So when I finally cut the cord and said, nope, everybody across the board, everybody has to stand on their own. These rental properties have to stand on their own. And I really made them stand on their own and earn their keep, and got the rents to where they had to be, got them fixed up to where they had to be, to the minimum standards. And if they couldn't, I would sell them, because there was really no point in holding on to them if they couldn't stand on their own. Because what I was doing, in essence, by not playing honest banker, you're going to hear me talk about that here in a second, by not playing honest banker with myself, I was in effect stealing from this business over here that was profitable, from the property management business. So that you can't do that. You can't fund your losers with your winners. And that's a great way to grow broke. So what I want to talk about is now that if you are making money, especially if you've got a business that's truly standing on its own and making money, and now you're thinking about, well, okay, well, how do I actually hold cash? And I hear this a lot, especially in the real estate space, where real estate investors are always about deploying their cash. And I hear this especially from guys like Grant Cardone. If you don't know Grant Cardone, he's the 10X guy. And he is always talking about how cash is trash. Well, that makes sense for him to say that because he runs basically a syndication, well, I don't know if you'd call it a syndication, but basically a REIT, right? A real estate investment trust, where he wants you to take your money and put it into his fund, right? So he can take your money and yeah, he'll give you a return on your money, but he wants you to invest your money with him. So of course he's going to say cash is trash. I mean, I think he stood up in front of a group of Britons and tore a bill in half, which, was destroying government property, but whatever, I guess when you have $1 billion in assets, you can do that. But that's the funny thing is that, it was just kind of, it was just, he was making a point and he wants people to take their money and put it with him. Cash is not trash. I promise you, he has plenty of operating cash and he needs operating cash to help mitigate his risk. And I'm not going to make this a treatise about why to hold cash because that could be a whole other hour. But if you're on board with it or you're on the fence about why to hold cash, I would invite you to read the book Great by Choice by Jim Hansen and Jim Collins and Morgan Hansen. And that book was by the Jim Collins who wrote Good to Great. He wrote Built to Last. I mean, he wrote a lot of very, very well-researched books. And one of the things that they noticed were the companies that grew the fastest and were the healthiest, and this is also talking about equity gains, is that they had 3 times to 10 times more cash than their peers in their industry. And that made them healthier. It made them withstand risk better and manage risk a lot better. And also to take advantage of good luck events when they came along. And they also helped them weather bad luck events when they came along. Because if you don't have cash and the only thing that you can do is go and borrow, okay, which you might have been holding cash that you might lose purchasing power of 3 to 5%, but now you're borrowing at somewhere between 8 to 10 to 12 to sometimes 20%. How in the world does that math make sense? It doesn't make sense. So when you're looking at someone like Warren Buffett, who is holding a lot of cash in the form of cash assets, and he's holding that cash in treasury bills and government government T-bills, he's doing that not because of the amazing return he's going to get, but because there's really nothing right now that he wants to invest in. He wants to hold his cash. And if you've been tracking the value of Berkshire Hathaway over the last number of years, how much it's actually growing. And he's offsetting his risk and he's maintaining a very healthy cash position. So I'm going to leave it there in terms of that. So you might be thinking, okay, well, let's say for argument's sake, you're thinking, okay, this is great, but where am I going to hold my cash? So where about holding cash? First and foremost, don't try to get super fancy with it. You might be thinking, well, I don't want to be earning 3% interest rates. And yes, because the other side of this is you want to hold your cash in tax advantaged places. You want to hold your cash where it is safe and also from a tax advantage position. So one of the interesting things that I have learned is something called the infinite banking concept. Now, for those of you who are Dave Ramsey purists, he hates the idea. He hates the idea. He actually did a full video or it was a call-in show, and he just basically jumped up and down on the infinite banking concept. If you truly know how it works, pretty much everything he said was wrong. And I'm a Dave Ramsey guy. I like him. I like what he teaches. I think he's good for a lot of folks up to a certain point in their financial journey. I think he gives you like a high school education in finance, but not anything further. It's like if you want to get your bachelor's degree, you have to go beyond Dave Ramsey, right? And I like Dave Ramsey. I'm just saying, but there's a next step, and it's like he likes to keep you like this wounded animal in a cage and never grow beyond that. So it pains me to say that. I like the guy. I like what he writes. I do like his faith. But but there's a next step. There's a next level. And I think he just, for whatever reason, doesn't go beyond that. And I don't know why. And maybe there is another level that he teaches, but I'm just not familiar with it. So anyway, what we're talking about right now is holding cash and where to do that, where it makes the most sense. So one of the things that I really like is, again, I mentioned it before, or just a few minutes ago, is the infinite banking concept. Now, this is very specific. I'm not going to be able to get into the nuts and bolts of this, but this is where you're going to be holding your cash in the cash value of a whole life insurance policy. Now, you can't do this just with any specific type of insurance policy, nor can you do this really with any specific type of insurance company. It's got to be with any old insurance company. It has to be with a very specific type of insurance with a very specific type of insurance company. So how does that work? Well, first and foremost, most insurance companies, and this is what Dave Ramsey had talked about when he's talking about holding the cash value with a company like Northwestern, Mutual or Prudential or, like New York Life. Those are publicly traded companies, right? So when you're looking at those, and I think, is Northwestern Mutual? I think it is publicly traded, but you like State Farm, for example, State Farm, Allstate, Prudential, those are publicly traded companies. So that's immediately off the table. And the reason why that's off the table is because you want this company to be mutually held, which means that if you buy an insurance policy, that you become, in essence, a part owner in that company. And that's a really important consideration because of the next piece, which means that you want that company to be participating. What does that mean, to be participating? Well, that means that if they declare a dividend, that you participate in the dividend. So if they declare a 5 or 6% dividend that year, that you will participate in that dividend. So you want a participating, mutually held insurance company. Now, you might be thinking, well, are there companies that are like that? There absolutely are. But there's a third component that I really like. Now, this is more of a personal preference, but I would also tell you that it's just much easier to handle, and it's much faster if you're dealing with a company that practices what's called non-direct recognition. Non-direct recognition. I'll explain what that means. Let's say that you go down to the bank and you have $100,000 in a savings account, and you have $100,000 in the savings account, and the savings account is earning 5%. So as long as that money is in the savings account, you are going to earn 5%. Pretty straightforward. The minute you take that $100,000 out of the savings account, you are no longer earning interest. Make sense? That would be known as direct recognition. That means it's directly recognized in terms of what's in the policy. Okay? So that's direct recognition. Non-direct recognition would be if you went to the bank and said, hey, bank, I've got $100,000 sitting in a savings account in your bank, and I want to use that money as collateral for a loan. And you might be thinking, well, why in the world would you do that? Well, it'll make sense here in a second. So let's say now this is a very low risk loan for the bank, because you're going to use secured money, their money in their bank for collateral. So it's a very low risk loan to them. So are they going to charge you interest? Of course they are, because they're in the business of managing risk and making money. So they might loan you that $100,000. They'll secure that $100,000 in the bank, and they'll say, okay, fine, we're going to charge you a pretty low rate of interest because the risk is so low, right? And it's really interesting that they'll do this, because when a bank makes a loan, a large bank has to set aside what's called a loan loss reserve. So based on the amount of risk that is in their bank, if they have a cash amount that's sitting in their bank that they can secure, their risk rating would basically be a 1. And most banks will risk rate a credit from 1 to 9. So basically a risk rated 1 credit is extremely low risk. So that means they have to set aside just a teeny tiny little bit of money for a loan loss reserve to loan you the $100,000. There is some risk, but it's very low. Whereas if they're loaning money to you based on, say, like accounts receivable or say equipment, or anything along those lines, or real estate, they might risk rate that as a level 4 or level 5 risk rating, right? Just depends. It depends on the bank. There's a lot more to it than that, but I'm just saying, and as a result, because let me finish that thought, because they're risk rating at a 4 or 5, a 4 would have more loan loss reserves. A 5 would have even more loan loss reserves, right? So this is really important when they're risk rating their credits meaning loans, that they have to set aside more money out of their capital stack, right? Out of their tier 1 capital, tier 2 capital, right? Things like that. They have to set more money aside. So they can't loan as much. So they can only take on so many risk rated 3 credits, 4 credits, 5 credits. If they have way too many, a disproportionate amount of risk rated 6 credits, which are kind of what you're known as substandard loans, it starts to put the bank in a very weakened financial position, which is kind of what happened back in 2008, 2009. So coming back to the non-direct recognition, basically what they would do is they're going to say, hey, look, I've got this $100,000 balance in your savings account that's sitting in your bank. I want you to use that as collateral and loan me $100,000. And they're going to say, fine. So you're going to earn 5% on the money that's sitting there, and they may charge you 7% on that money as interest. And you might be saying, yeah, but they're screwing me. they're paying, I'm paying them 7. Meanwhile, I'm only earning 5. Here's the interesting thing though, and I can do this another time. I'm not going to do it right now, but you actually mathematically make more money earning 5% on money that's compounding than you are paying 7% on a loan. And the reason is because you're earning 5% on an increasing balance while you're paying 7% on a decreasing balance. Do the math, do it on simple interest, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So generally that crossover, depending on how much interest, and usually it's pretty, you might be thinking, well, how does that actually work? Just try that out. Try it out on a simple Excel spreadsheet, and you'll see the crossover. Like you can pay almost twice as much interest depending on the length of the term and everything else. It's quite substantial. So even if you didn't put any extra money in, you just let the interest compound in the the savings account, you actually end up making more money than you actually end up paying out in interest, even though you're paying a higher rate, because that's how money works, right? That's how math works. So do it on your own and see what you think. So we're talking about holding cash here. We're talking about holding cash in the cash valuable life insurance policy. So we're talking about, first and foremost, it has to be a mutually held company, not a publicly held company, right? It's mutually held insurance company, not a publicly held insurance company. Because if it's mutually held and they declare a dividend, where does the dividend go? It goes to Wall Street, right? It goes to the shareholders who own it on Wall Street. So, and that may go to your mutual funds and things like that. So it's not just all like evil bankers. This is also, it goes to regular people like you and me. If you're holding State Farm as in your mutual fund, or if you're holding it as a shareholder, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But if you are holding it as a policy, you don't get the benefit of that. So that's why it needs to be a mutually held company that is a participating company. You may have mutually held companies that do not participate in their dividends. And there's a few of them, but there's not a lot, but there's a few of them, and you'd have to pay attention to that. So as you start thinking this through, and then you're thinking, okay, and I prefer they practice non-direct recognition. So what that means in the insurance world, I went through the analogy there in the banking side of things, but when you're looking at things from the insurance perspective, you'd say, well, how does this apply in the insurance perspective? Well, the money that's being held inside the policy, like again, so you're putting money into the cash balance of the policy, and this is being built up over time. So let's say that you have $100,000 amount that's borrowable in the cash value of a policy. If you are with a company that practices direct recognition, what that means is they will take that money out of the policy, and you are no longer earning dividends. And that's no bueno, right? So we want to keep earning, we want to keep that engine turning. We don't want to interrupt the compounding. That's how Warren Buffett amassed so much money in such a short period of time, because he never interrupted the compounding. So we want to leave that money in there to keep compounding, right? We don't want to take that would be like just taking like the $100,000 out of the savings account. You are no longer earning that interest. So you want to leave the money inside the policy. But with an insurance company that practices non-direct recognition, what that does is it uses that money as collateral, and it takes this 100,000 that you're borrowing from the insurance company. You're borrowing that 100,000 from a policy loan, and they're using that money as collateral. That's how it works. So when they're borrowing those funds out of the general fund of the policy, they're using your money as collateral. You're still earning dividends. Yes, the insurance company charges you interest. Yes, it's generally pretty simple interest, 7%, 8%, something like that, because it's pretty low risk, but it is using your money inside the policy as collateral. That's how they're able to do that. And that's a really big component. Now, the one other thing that I want to make here, and this is a really important component to this, is that you want to use a whole life policy. Now, I have heard other people talk about, well, I have an IUL, right? I'm doing infinite banking, but I'm using an IUL. An IUL is short for Indexed Universal Life. Here's the problem with that. An Indexed Universal Life policy, the insurance actually gets more expensive the longer you hold the policy. And they conveniently forget to tell you that. The real selling point with IULs is, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but the real selling point for IULs is they say, well, it tracks the market. So if the market goes up 20% that year, you can get the gains of the market. Except you don't. Because remember when I talked about participating, like a participating insurance company? Well, they don't have to participate at 100%. They can participate at 60%, 70%. It's like, I'm thinking of a number. Guess the number, right? Like, I'm not okay with that. So in other words, if it goes up 20% one year, and you might be thinking, all right, I'm going to get 20% dividend in my IUL. They might say, hold on a second. I'm thinking of a number. I'm thinking that number is more like 70%. So you're going to get only a 14% when the rest of it goes up 20. And that sucks. I'm sorry. I'm not okay with that. And that's what they conveniently forget to tell you, number one. Number two is that the insurance gets more expensive the longer that you hold it. So what ends up happening is the longer you start to hold the policy, the insurance gets more expensive. And before you know it, you have to kick in a fairly sizable amount of money just to keep the policy in force. So IULs do serve a purpose in the insurance world for sure. There's a purpose for term. There's a purpose for IULs. There's a purpose for variable universal life. There's a purpose for whole life. But IULs are not the purpose for infinite banking. Just telling you, I have done a ton of research on this, and the math doesn't math. So I get a lot of hate for this, and I get a lot of people telling me that I don't understand. I'm thinking, no, what you're telling people is that, like, just ask them, will the insurance get more expensive or less expensive, or will it stay the same the older that I get? And a whole life policy, that's the point. The insurance does not get more expensive. And you are earning a 5 or 6% dividend along the way. Now, here's the thing. I mentioned this, and I'm going to make this last point, and then we're going to land the plane. When you're holding this cash in the cash value of a life insurance policy, There's one thing that we didn't factor in the case of the bank. If you're earning 5% in a savings account, do you get to take home 5%? What are we not taking into account? We're not taking into account good old Uncle Sam. They're going to get their pound of flesh, right? So depending on your incremental tax rate, you might pay 28% or 30% or whatever the tax rate is that you're going to pay for that interest. The dividends, on the other hand, as long as you don't overfund the policy and as long as it doesn't become a MEC, which is called a modified endowment contract, as long as you don't MEC the policy, you are growing those cash dividends in a tax sheltered vehicle. So you might earn 5 or 6% as a dividend along the way, and that is being earned in a tax sheltered environment. In a savings account, that is not the case. In a savings account, you are having to pay taxes on those dividends. Now, of course, you can keep the $5,000 there and pay out as something else. But my point is that you're paying taxes on that income. So as basically as interest income. So that is the real main crux of that. For those people who happen to live in the less free democratic states, you know who you are. Some of these, most states will actually allow this money to be that sits in a cash valuable life insurance policy to be judgment proof, which is also kind of nice. So you can be growing this this cash and this cash balance of a life insurance policy, and it's also judgment proof. So I think that's also pretty slick too, that you can use this as part of estate planning, and certainly borrowing. And you never want to take a distribution from the policy, because that will trigger a taxable event. But as long as you're borrowing the funds, from the insurance policy, it never becomes a taxable event. And you can pay it back based on whatever terms you want to pay it back on. The interest is going to get charged the way it gets charged, and you can just create whatever repayment schedule that you want. But you've got to play what's called honest banker. You got to be honest and pay that money back. And you're going to pay that money back with interest. That interest basically you would pay yourself. And over time, you're going to wind up with a massive amount of cash in that policy that you can continue to borrow from. And you could live off that if you really wanted to. So really, when you're holding cash and you're holding that in the cash value of a life insurance policy, it is a really, really smart way to hold cash. It's tax advantaged, and it's obviously judgment proof. There's lots of different reasons to want to do this. And that's the really interesting thing that when you really start to lean into this. Now you might be thinking, well, how many policies, what kind of insurance companies are we talking about? Most of these companies are over 150 years old, most of them. So when you're looking at a company like Foresters, when you're looking at a company like One America, when you're looking at a company like Penn Mutual or Mass Mutual, those are all companies that are everything that I just described. They're mutually held, they're participating, they practice non-direct recognition, and they all have whole life policies. Guardian used to be a big one, but they recently switched over to direct recognition. So I don't recommend those anymore, that company anymore. But and there's plenty of others. There's probably about a dozen other companies that still do that fit all these bills, but it just depends on what is best for you. So if you are interested in something like this and you are wanting me to connect you with someone, I don't sell insurance. I have no dog in this fight, but I can connect you with a few people that do this sort of thing, and I'm happy to make that connection for you. So we are going to land the plane on this in terms of holding actual cash. One quick thing, if you are interested in information like this and you would like to be part of the tribe and you're a Facebook kind of person, this is the group here, the Time Wealthy Advantage, and the link is below if you'd like to check and see what that looks like. Again, just don't be a jerk. If you want to come in and you want to be part of the tribe, you're more than welcome to come in. Again, this is what it looks like right now. If you're coming in after the fact, it may look different, but for right now, that's what it looks like. Also, if you'd like a copy of the Time Wealthy Advantage, and it looks like this, and there's also an assortment of other guides that for a few extra dollars. The link is in the description in this video, and you can get not only the main book, The Time Wealthy Advantage, I will sign it and I will send it to you. That is if you are domestic United States. If you're outside domestic United States, of course, Alaska and Hawaii, yes, you are domestic. But if it's outside the U.S., your best bet is probably to order it through Amazon. I won't be able to sign it, but I would still, if you just show me that you ordered, I'm still happy to give you a 45-minute one-to-one coaching session. And if you do that, you can book it directly with me if you do order it through the link below. All right, that is all I have, everybody. Thanks for sticking around. I hope you found this to be helpful, and I'd like to hear what your cash management and your cash handling plans are. So if you're holding something different, let me know. Have a great rest of your day. See you guys next time.